everybody, and welcome to another edition of Mamas in Miami, where together we're navigating parenthood with unwavering solidarity of each other and fierce, fierce love. Um, I could not do my COVID story without my partner in crime over here. That was definitely a moment in time that many of us of our generation will never forget. And it's pretty much seared in our brains as parents as well. We're really, really proud to say that most recently, when our son was interviewed for sixth grade and they asked him what it was like during COVID to virtual learn, our son said, "We have no idea what you're talking about," because we had a wonderful experience during COVID. So if anything, I would say that that's a parent win for both of us. Not a lot of people can say that their children can look back at their pandemic days and think about it with a smile on their face and wonderful memories. And I give all the credit to my partner in crime over here, who was um way above and beyond his years with this vision for what the COVID time would look for our family. And if it wasn't for him, I don't think we would have gotten through it. So without further ado, this is my husband, Danny Diaz, and he was our captain of our quarantine. Honey, do you remember the pandemic?
I do, but before we start, I just wanted to congratulate you on all your success with this programming that you've been putting together, helping so many folks share their stories of overcoming adversity and challenges, and just creating a tribe to be supportive with a lot of difficult moments. So, just wanted to commend you with that. And having said that, COVID was a very challenging time, needless to say, for so many people. And, tragic that so many people obviously lost their lives. Tragic that, some old folks later on in their years, obviously, that were unable to be with their families at, a moment of their passing. They were alone, in nursing homes, in hospitals. I mean, it was a really, really sad time for a lot of folks. I'd be remiss without saying that. And obviously, I say, same as you, that, we made the best of the situation, how difficult it was, how sad it was, being separated from friends and family, those who had COVID, who had to quarantine and couldn't spend time, with us. Again, we had to make the best of the situation, right? And so, what was that? I don't know. I had a moment of clarity. Obviously, how, through the grace of God, how faith-based we are here in the family, and, just prayed a lot, and just asked for inspiration and vision and clarity, and we got it.
We certainly did. And um, we made some incredible new friends in the whole process of it, who we will forever be grateful for in the great state of Colorado. Many people still come up to us today and say, "Oh, you're back in Miami." They seem to forget that we did come back from Colorado. Um, our story goes that we ended up spending the pandemic in Vail Valley, Colorado. My husband had this vision and our family went with it, and it worked out for us. And I'm just really happy that my kids can look back and not be scared at those moments in time, and could look back at it with good memories in their hearts. I'm going to take you guys through the whole story, through the beginning, from beginning to end. This is what we went through. So, March 2020, there was a shutdown, a global shutdown, which I had never seen anything like it. Had you?
Nobody's ever seen anything
Nobody's
that
ever
I
seen.
coincided with your birthday. So
Yes. So, March 12th was my birthday, and we were getting ready to celebrate my son's first communion. Um, our school at the time, we went to a Catholic school, so they were preparing him at school. My husband was baptizing his godson that same weekend, and he took me out to dinner on March 12th on my birthday, and we were watching the news, and he said, "You know what, honey? It's probably going to be the last time we have dinner for a while out in public." Um, I'm going to be very honest. I got very scared. My mental health started going south. I think I inhaled 2 bottles of Clorox just from everything that I was wiping down in those first couple of weeks. I was terrified. I was so scared. I did feel like we were, like, in this apocalyptic world, um, and it got real when they sent the kids home from school.
Yeah. And, obviously, nobody having dealt with something like this before, we're constantly, reading online and, watching TV and the media, obviously being extremely alarmist, given the fact that we had no idea what to expect. So, I think a lot of folks reacted the same way that you did. And, we had to try to, take everything in stride and do the best that we could given the circumstances. For us at the time, our children, were very young, and my biggest concern was their lack of attention in school. Our son suffers from a bit of ADHD, and my daughter's just very, excited and very active, and we didn't, know how they were going to deal with being home and doing their academic studies online, and that was a complete and utter disaster. My daughter had maybe an hour a week of time on screen for school, so most of the work that she was doing was with us at home. So add another profession to our career. All the other things that we were doing at the time of being a teacher as well, which, high five to all the teachers out there. We're extremely grateful for all that you guys do.
Absolutely.
'Cause we certainly, couldn't do it. And I think the pandemic showed a lot of us, all the efforts that teachers put in, on a daily basis to help improve our children's lives. So, we're super grateful for them, and obviously learned a lot, during that period of time of how much they put into it. And so, that was my biggest concern. Danny had a really rough time. He had a couple of hours a day, which, obviously with kids with ADHD, having them sit for a couple minutes is hard enough, much less a couple hours in front of a screen. So, it was in essence for that period of time, kind of a lost academic, period for him.
Absolutely. I always say that in the months of March and April of 2020, I ended up going back to first grade or second grade, whatever grade he was in at the time. I think it was second grade. I went back to second grade because if I wasn't sitting next to Danny, he wasn't doing the work. One thing that is just forever ingrained in my head was that the 1 minute I turned away to put my daughter on her screen for kindergarten, I turn around and I see Danny in a chair like this. I go, honey, what are you doing? He goes, jumping jacks, it's PE, but they can't see my feet. I knew we were in trouble, and I saw him do that. I think right after that, my husband started putting Danny on his Peloton
Yeah.
to really get a workout in. So yeah, the online learning was not working for our family. I, to this day, still say that my children, so my daughter was smack in the middle of learning how to read in kindergarten. And I think that she has struggles with that to this day. And my son was in the middle of, I think, subtraction of the triple digits. And to this day, I think he still struggles with that too, because this interruption just came in those pivotal moments of their learning block lives. Um, that unfortunately, that's something that I want to actually have a conversation with down the road with some professionals to see where they see the holes in our education system today due to the pandemic, because I'm sure I'm not the only one that sees that in their children.
For sure. The delay is real.
The delay is real. Yeah. So, um, as I mentioned before, my mental health started deteriorating. I even had a sciatica flare up. I remember being in bed for 2 days, and this one had to take over the educational learning for our children. And I was just so scared. Do you remember?
Yeah. It was a disaster.
Um, I got so scared to the point that I wouldn't even let other family members into the house. I was Cloroxing the boxes that would show up from Amazon, doing probably everything that we were all being told or advised to do. If there was an advisement from Dr. Fauci, I was doing it at the time. I got really, really scared, and I got very nervous for our family members, our elderly. Um, Danny immediately saw that this was taking a turn for the worse for me mentally. And I think that that's when God illuminated him and said, let's get Cristy out of the state of Florida.
Yeah. Well, look, obviously, we had a place there, and we wanted to take advantage of, wide open spaces. Although it was actually, and I must say, those days in Miami at that time during the pandemic, I had seen more neighbors in my neighborhood than I'd seen my entire life, and I lived in my neighborhood most of my life. Folks sitting outside, having cocktails, having dinner, and walking around with their children and grandchildren. And it was really refreshing. I mean, people were very kind and very supportive. Obviously, going through such a difficult time, everybody was, kind enough to talk and share at a distance at the time. So it was actually a really really nice time, for the neighborhood. But it just the open spaces was an issue, and obviously the academic situation with the kids was an issue. And we've been spending summers in Colorado for several years at that point, and we had already decided that we were going to go back that summer. But conversations obviously based on Christy's concerns about just her sanity, frankly, and the kids really not doing much by way of academics at the time. We started having conversations about leaving a little early. Obviously, there were restrictions in place at the time. We weren't allowed to basically go hopping from state to state. Hotels were closed at the time. Some states were actually closed off, even if you had a second home there, unless you were an actual resident, they wouldn't let you in. And Colorado was one of those places. So, we started going through the exercise of identifying when that would happen and being, very vigilant about when that would happen. And eventually, the states started opening up, right? And hotels started opening up. It was very limited. So we started kind of planning the process of how to get there. And, that in of itself, obviously, it was unbelievable.
So I should jump in right here and say, because I was so scared at the time, I told Danny immediately that flying was out of the question. There was no way in hell I was gonna step foot in an airplane or an airport. I was deathly afraid. I all I envisioned was my children sticking their fingers in every single hole that the chair in the airplane had to offer and throwing them in their faces. So Danny said, "Fine, then the only other alternative is driving." And I think he said it half jokingly at the time, not thinking that I would agree to it. But when I said, "Okay, let's do it," I said, "If you have a plan, present it to me and we'll consider it." And that's exactly what he did. He went on MapQuest. He I think you had a humongous map of the roads and the interstates and turnpikes,
Yeah, we just basically put
and you
we
mapped it.
we just put it together. I mean, it was, a lot of firsts, right? And, given the fact that everything had shut down and you had time, it was one of those things that I thought, well, if we're gonna do a road trip, let's do it right. And so, we mapped our way over to Colorado, and yes, it's a hike, but we also live in one of the most beautiful countries in the world, and we were able to see most of it, during the pandemic. So, we hopped in the car, we kind of mapped our way through with stops in Atlanta, St. Louis. We figured, there was no real major stop once we got, past St. Louis, other than getting into Colorado. So we pretty much went as far as we could go into Kansas, and found a small town to stay in, which ended up being Colby, Kansas. We stayed in a Holiday Inn Express there. Before actually we made we'll go through the
We're gonna go through the
but
process in
then
a
we
minute.
we ended up, in Colorado, in the Vail Valley, on, noon on the 4th day.
Right.
So that was
So I had a whole bunch of rules. My rule was we can never be driving longer than 2 Disney movies, and that was just because I figured that's the attention span my children had. We always had to bake in some sort of schoolwork, and at the time, not many cars had Wi-Fi. Now I feel like everybody's car had Wi-Fi, so Danny had to order a Wi-Fi plug for our Ford Explorer that we took out there so that the kids would be able to connect to their classrooms for their online learning time. That was just crazy. Um, so yes, so no longer than 2 Disney movies. bought these covers for the public bathrooms. That do you remember these? They looked like, if you can think in your mind right now of what it looked like to put a one of those disposable pads on a changing table, imagine that in the form of a teepee that would sit over a toilet, because I was so scared that the kids would get COVID from a toilet seat. And so, what was it that Adriana used to call them? It'll come to me. They had little COVIDs on them and everything. So I stocked up on those. I filled the car with wipes. I filled the car with, masks. We had the plastic shields in case we were to get off to use the restroom. I had taken gloves. Can't forget, you all know and love now Popcorn, who comes out in all of our videos. We had to travel with Popcorn. We couldn't just leave her behind, so she jumped in the car. And then I figured, hey, there's so many things I want to take from home to our apartment that we were just settling into in Colorado. So let me load some home good stuff that I've accumulated also. Y- My husband Danny could not see the back windshield of the car with how we loaded it. I even tried to get enough snacks in there to avoid having to stop at drive-throughs because we really didn't know what we were going to expect on the highway. So the other thing was, we were still waiting for my son to have his first communion, and we didn't know how that was looking either. So we were kind of like hanging around to see, are they going to put on the first communion? Are they going to sit and wait? Should we just, figure this out in the fall? To which we said, you know what? Let's get out of here. Things are not improving here. Miami was still shut down. Roads were starting to reopen. The state was starting to reopen. So I think we took off
May
8 AM,
yeah.
May 11th.
May 12th, 8 a.m. May 12th, we left. We hit the turnpike. Again, apocalyptic, zombie apocalypse, nobody on the road.
Yeah.
When we had to stop to use the restroom, we stopped at the plazas on the turnpike, and obviously everything was shut down. Nothing was open with the exception of the bathrooms, which anybody who's been to Orlando, to Disney, on the turnpike, the plazas are teeming with people constantly all day. So that was just shocking. And, we made record time out of the state because there was literally no one from the road. And, we got up to Atlanta, and we stayed at the Westin on Peachtree. And that was, for those of you who know Atlanta, it's, right next to Century Village where the park was, where, during the Olympics, they kind of repositioned all of that area. And it's a huge park. I mean, probably the size of, I don't know how many, 5 football fields. I mean, it was massive. And our dog was with us. And so obviously we had to stop on the way up, walk her and whatnot to, do her thing, which we did when we got to Atlanta. And, it was, I'll never forget, walking from the Westin to the park and literally seeing maybe 3 or 4 people at the park, which is usually teeming with people as well. It was just mind blowing to me. And then, returning to the Westin, uh, which is a 70-story tower in the heart of Atlanta. Obviously, Atlanta being, one of the biggest cities in the southeastern United States, there were 5 hotel guests at the time. So for me, it was obviously shocking. They put us all in one
One
floor,
floor.
next to each other because, again, staffing was super light. We ended up eating in the hotel, in the room. They did bring us room service. And, again, not much to do and visit while we were there because everything was shut down. And then we woke up early the next day, making our way to St. Louis, which we drove through, North Georgia, through Tennessee, Kentucky. I had never thought I was going to be driving through a lot of these parts of the country, and it was absolutely beautiful. Rolling holes, hills and rivers, and just, obviously, again, there was very few people on the road. So we just were able to travel pretty easily. And, St. Louis was a little sad. We did have a kind of a shocking, jarring situation occur. 3 of the hotels that were open there were off the river, off the Mississippi River. The Hyatt was closed, which sits on the Mississippi River, which is like basically the symbolic hotel there. We stayed at an old Hilton, you know, 1800s building, really, really pretty, but we walked in and it was super dark. And, you know, again, similar situation. There were 3 people in the hotel. You know, we made our way, to the room. We went and picked up some food. I think there was a Ruth's Chris that was doing,
It was a
you know,
wood
window survey.
exactly.
So we picked up some steaks.
Yeah,
We're like, this is probably the best meal we're gonna have on the drive over and probably for a while. So anyway, we
yeah.
we ended up, you know, picking up some food, eating at the house or in the hotel room, and then, you know, we visited the river. We went to the arch. No one there. There was no one on the arch, no one on the river.
Yeah.
Um, you know, obviously walking around with our mask on and whatnot. Again, just super, super weird. And then finally, when we went to bed, you know, it was early, I guess 8 or 9 o'clock because we were gonna leave
What else
the
am I gonna
day. And then that evening, you know, we are awakened by, you know, shouting in the room next door. And
and what
and
else?
and literally, you know, it was a domestic dispute. A husband and wife were screaming at each other, and they started a physical altercation with each other because they shook the walls. I mean, they literally were banging up against the walls.
Yeah.
To which we had to obviously call downstairs. The authorities came. You know, our daughter,
Do you remember how she woke up?
she woke up freaking out, asking what that was.
She went, "Daddy," and I think I saw enough of the gleam in his eye to know that he was concerned also, and the next day he confided in me that the next step he was gonna do was to tell us all to get to the ground.
Yeah, because
So for fear of what could have been happening in the other room.
you never know.
So if my mental health was down here, that one could have be under. It was crazy. It felt like we were walking into a movie. Not one soul, and we're in town in these humongous, monumental locations in our, in our country, and then we get this domestic dispute, and we hear the police sirens. Just scary at times.
Yeah,
So,
it wasn't pleasant.
um, with that said, I will say that driving through the country was absolutely amazing. We've never done a cross-country trip before, and I think our only complaint was that everything was closed,
Yeah.
that we couldn't get off. We are such fans of going to presidential libraries, and we went through so many in what they call flyover states that we wished were open because when else are we going to be over there?
Yeah.
I'll never forget there was a sign that said the museum to the Wizard of Oz movie, and it said, "Follow the yellow brick road," and I was so mad that we couldn't see it because what are the chances that we'll ever be there again? But, we tried to keep it exciting for the kids. We kind of decided on the way that we were gonna collect as many troll dolls as possible from the McDonald's Happy Meals, and we were in search for one in particular the whole way, just to give our kids something to look forward to during the day. They were sitting in that car 8 hours a day, and they were troopers.
Yeah, they really were resilient. But yeah, we stopped at the Eisenhower Presidential Library, which unfortunately was closed. And I'm a big you know, fan of Ike's and obviously his trajectory to the presidency. So it was very cool. You know, to Chrissy's point, I don't know how, you know, how often I'm going to return to Kansas. Beautiful state, rolling hills and rivers and whatnot as well.
Stunning.
But, you know, that was a really cool experience. And then finally, you know, we drove through the eastern part of Colorado, which is plains. I mean, it's a large, you know, farm part of the state, and you know, it was obviously cold at that point.
Yeah.
And you know, we ended up arriving in the Vail Valley, again at around noon, on the 4th day, and there was absolutely no one there.
It was crazy.
And, you know, again, the kids were, you know, elated to arrive, obviously. You know, we went into Beaver Creek and, you know, again, there was no one there at the base of the mountain. There was still obviously snowpack that had melted, and the kids were, and the dog as well, were running around having a blast.
Yeah.
You know, and we ran into, you know, 2 folks walking their dogs as well. And, you know, started the conversation with them. And I remember one of them saying, man, this, you know, you'll never see this again. You have Beaver Creek to yourself. And, you know, sure enough, it was just, you know, mind blowing that there was very few people in the valley. You know, they had just recently started opening up again. And, we made it, just through a shocking, minimally, public, trip to Colorado.
And there I thought that that's where our adventure would kind of, like, stop, uh, and that we'd be coming home soon. Little did I know that that was certainly not the case, and it was just the beginning of the most unexpected, wonderful year that our family's ever had. Um, Beaver Creek Colorado is very special to us. A lot of people are probably wondering why Colorado. Well, I've always had an attachment to Colorado. I grew up vacationing there with my family and close friends. And Danny and I actually got engaged there. Shout out to Bino's Cabin where we got engaged. And we just always loved it out there. Danny and I loved vacationing there. When the kids were very little and summers in Miami would get so hot, we started going for 7 days, and then 7 turned into 10 days, and 10 days turned into 2 weeks, and then I started thinking, how cool would it be if my kids had the opportunity to do summer camp out there, and that's kind of how all this snowballed. Um, so we just thought we were starting our summer early. Uh, we got there and we kind of breathed we had this breath of relief, and we just enjoyed being in the outdoors. Our dog was having the most amazing time just running through space, and the kids were just happy to be in this humongous backyard, right? In the mountains. Um, I think our first way, oh my God, we're still in a pandemic, was Memorial Weekend. It was Friday afternoon, 5 o'clock, and we were like, you know what? Maybe we should get the kids some bicycles while we're out here and teach them how to ride a bike, because what else are we gonna do? And the minute my daughter got on the sidewalk, she hit a bump and fell over the bicycle and lost all the front teeth.
Her 2 front teeth.
That's all there was back then, 2 front teeth.
Her 2 front teeth.
And I think that was a realization, oh, we're still in a pandemic and we don't have a doctor out here, and
We
what do we do?
we had to rush her to urgent care, and, she
Called our
thankfully
doctor back home.
it was fine, but again, going through the exercise of finding which one was available and which one was open and which one did not, create a concern for COVID, which one wasn't a testing site, it was just a real big, issue to try to figure out where we go.
Yeah, and then at that point, Danny said, "You know what? On Monday when everything opens, maybe it's a good idea to start making a list of vets and doctors and dentists just in case, because you never know." And I thought, okay, one thing to do. So, we're carrying on through the summer. We're quarantining. The four of us. We're having a great time, and August rolls around, and we hear that
Before it was July. It
the
was July.
sure.
Yeah, so it was before. I was in July. Actually, I'll never forget. I think we were driving to Great Sand Dunes National Park, which, was one of the things that a lot of folks did, right? It is, going to open spaces, it became a thing to go to national parks. And, we took full advantage of the fact that we were out west and that we had a lot of them at our footstep, at our doorstep. So,
We did Utah.
we did 7 national parks, over the course of our time out there during the pandemic.
But that summer.
But
We
that one in particular, we were driving, we were listening to, I think it was the radio, and then I started getting some, text messages, and obviously you get pinged regularly when, it's breaking news that, they're talking about pushing back school openings and things of that nature. And at that point, we started making phone calls, and it was calls we started making on that
Right.
trip, where friends of ours back home were telling us that they were going to push back school. And even if they, even when they pushed back school, it was still going to be, somewhat remote, that there was going to be, day on, day off, there was going to be different cohorts. And so, the consistency of being in the classroom was absent, right? And whatever plan they had proposed at the time, and it was going to be pushed back. And at that point, my mind just went racing back to, the beginning of the pandemic, and, how, the kids just had a horrible time, and that they belong in the classroom. That was my mind kind of was always centered on that the kids belong in the classroom, that they needed engagement with other kids. They needed a teacher to direct them. And, we are not the teacher, right? And it's hard enough to, rear your kids, but to educate them as well is very, very difficult. And, I give a shout out to the people who homeschool their kids. That's just something that I never thought I could do. So, we started having those
Well,
conversations.
Danny started having those conversations. I thought he was none. I thought you were nuts. I said, "What do you mean we can't go home? What do you mean we're gonna put our kids in school here?" I go, "No, no, no, no. This is where we come to vacation. This is not where we live. Our kids have a school. We still haven't my our son still hasn't received the sacrament of first communion at that point. We need to go home. We've got parents out there. We've got our my grandfather, and I remember calling my mom, and she said, Danny's got it. He's doing the right thing. You guys can't come home. I go, what do you mean we can't come home? She goes, nobody knows what's happening here. And if they're gonna open schools over there, enroll them over there, and when things get better, just come home.
Yeah. So we weren't the only folks thinking that way. We started putting calls into a lot of our friends locally that had contacts in the local school system and the private schools. And, everybody told us that the folks who were like us that had gone over there to shelter in place and take advantage of wide open spaces and things of that nature, were doing the same. And so we were lucky enough to be directed to Vail Christian Academy, which is in Edwards, in the Vail.
Shout out to Vail Christian
And,
Academy.
they invited us in. They told us that, there were a lot of folks that had contacted them and that they were open to allowing us to stay as long or as little as we wanted to stay. Basically looking at it on a month-to-month basis, knowing that our intention was to come back home. And, it was a godsend. The school, since it was private, obviously, had some level of restrictions, but they were an independent school and, were open with the exception of obviously having to wear a mask. And so the kids, were able to go to school, from the day school started, kind of through the whole process, no cohorts, no a day on, day off. The kids were able to start first and third grade, normally. And, obviously that was a blessing. I mean, we were very, very blessed to be able.
At this time, I'd like to formally once again thank Mindy Dennison for taking the time with us that summer. Even, she was not only home quarantining, but she was also on summer vacation. And she got up and went to school and opened those doors for us to show us what we could expect and how they were going to deal with COVID and how they were going to keep the kids safe, and this is what's going to happen, and they're going to they had a plan, and I'm forever grateful to her and Corky Evans and Allison Hansen, who then said, hey, come, we'll test your kids and we'll get them ready for the first day of school. Don't forget that they need snow pants and all this stuff in their lockers for when winter comes, because they're gonna eat outside it. As a Miami girl born and raised, I went, "What do you mean they sit outside in the snow with a hot blood?" But secretly in my head, I'm thinking, "Well, that's not gonna happen because we're gonna be out of here soon."
Yeah.
But little did I know, again, that was not the case. So I'll never forget that first day of school when we dropped him off at Vail Christian Academy. I was such a mess, and I bawled my eyes out. I can't believe I'm getting emotional about it now, but I was so scared to drop him off. And fast forward to the end, I don't want to give away the story, but the last day of school, I cried so hard because I was so thankful to them. I mean, they really were just so amazing for our kids. And they made us feel so welcome and so at ease. And I remember Adriana was in a cohort of kindergarten and first graders, and Danny was in a cohort of third and fourth graders. And, I don't think there was more than 15 kids in each class, and I felt that they were just in the right place at the right time.
Yeah. I mean, it's small town living, at its finest. Obviously, it's a faith-based school and it's deeply embedded into their academic system. And, they were very, very welcoming and very supportive. And, just the kids were really, warm and just, well intentioned. And they welcomed our children and the kids adapted and adjusted as, we mentioned earlier, like the kids were really resilient and they made the best of the situation. But again, coming from Miami, both of us born and raised, we had never lived anywhere with seasons. So obviously there was a lot of adapting and adjusting to that. But it ended up being incredible. It was just this incredible experience. I attended their first field trip in September. It was in late September, and I'll never forget it. I drove with Aaron Diaz, and his son, and Danny, obviously, and we ran over to the Vail Pass, and it was, it looked like the mountain was on fire. I mean, the yellow was in full bloom. All the aspens were changing color. It looked like God was painting. I mean, it was just remarkable how beautiful it was. And so we were, driving through the valley, getting up to Vail Pass, and then we did a hike with, the entire school, through the Vail Pass, and that was their field trip. That was our first exposure to, what a field trip consists of in the Vail Valley for the school system. And it was just very special, to experience that. Obviously being in the fall, Miami in late September's
We don't have a fall.
still pretty hot. So anyway, it was just an incredible experience. That was an opportunity that I had to meet a lot of the families in the school.
And we will also note that we weren't the only transplants at that school that year. Some of our closest friends in the valley today, Danny mentioned Aaron Diaz and Lisa Diaz and Carrie Scotty and Lauren. Well, not Lauren. Had Lauren just moved there? Not sure. But anyway, we were all new to the school, so we kind of all bonded on that level. Um, that we were just starting from scratch there, and we kind of opened our quarantine, if you will, to include all of these new friends. Because something that somebody told me there in the summer was, "Have you guys made your friends yet?" And I said, "Why?" And they said, "Well, when the sun goes down and it starts getting really cold, it's going to be hard to meet friends, because you guys are going to be inside so much, and even more so during COVID." And I thought, that's something in Miami we don't experience because our best winters are spent outside, right? So that's when the weather's best out here. So it was just a change of living completely. We got to experience the seasons. We got to see leaves change, which we never had. My daughter and I, for her field trip, went apple picking, something you'd never do in Miami. Um, and like Danny said, we ended up seeing a lot more national parks. So anytime that there was a weekend, the long weekend, we would find a neighboring local park and take our kids and have that experience with them and with our dog Popcorn. So by the time it started snowing, remember I told you guys that they said I would have to have a snow outfit for my children in their lockers because they have lunch outside. Um, Things were getting better in Miami, and we called home, and I'm grateful to Danny. Danny always, in that sense, left it up to me. He said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "You know what? We're having such an incredible experience. Let's keep going. Let's finish out the school year. Let's give the kids this experience." And that's exactly what we did. And it was an experience of a lifetime.
Yeah, it was pretty special. I mean, we did Thanksgiving over there. Christmas, the family came over and spent it with us, which was extremely special. Um,
We got a visit from Santa.
it was a really, really incredible experience. I mean, obviously the change of pace of life was amazing. I was able to continue working, thankfully. That was actually a pretty scary moment. I was having kind of flashbacks and PTSD from the great financial crisis when the world stopped in terms of my practice. But, when things shut down, for some reason, again, I just had a certain level of clarity that there was, something was going to happen that, was going to be better. Right. And I had an incredible team, that supported me through the process. The government, I think, made, the right choice initially with their PPP support. And, we were able to secure that. And I committed to my team that I was going to pay them full freight, until the moment that I couldn't. And that's what I did. And thankfully, business came back, and, it didn't just come back, it came roaring back. And so, we benefited from that. And, I was able to come back on a regular basis, visit every month, for at least a week, so that I could, have FaceTime with the team and have FaceTime with clients. But, it just never skipped a beat. When I go back to the valley, we had our routine, right? It was just, taking the kids to school. I worked. Obviously, the 2-hour time difference was also helpful, that I got a lot of stuff out of the way early. And then, like Christy and I keep talking about it, in terms of the intentionality, and, of spending time with each other, right? So we just had a lot more time with each other as a family. We had a lot more time together as a couple. We had a lot of time with our kids, with very little, outside interference, right? When you live in a big city like we live in here today, there's just so much to do, so much to see. Everybody's in a hurry. So things are happening so quickly. Which is a good thing, right? That there's a lot of movement and economic activity, and you benefit from that. But there's something to be said about small town living, and we really immersed ourselves in that, and we're surrounded by just incredible people in the valley, and their children, and our children spending time with their children, and had an opportunity to really immerse themselves in the outdoors, immerse themselves in their faith and school academically, and they just benefited from it tremendously, and never skipped a beat. So it was an incredible experience.
Yeah, we are once again so grateful to Vail Christian Academy and all of their teachers there, because they are so important to this story, I think, in the whole point being that our children look back and don't think of it in a negative way or see it in a negative light at all. Um, Despite the mask wearing, to this day, they're like, "Yeah, we're never wearing a mask again." So many kids can't say that that was the worst of it, you know? So we're so grateful every day to everybody at Vail Christian Academy and everybody in the Vail Valley that welcomed us with open arms and just enveloped us and made us part of their community. Um, because it really was an amazing year for our family, full of so many adventures. So we ended up seeing 7 national parks. While we were out there, we always took our car and our dog, and we would pack everything up and go out and visit, which we're so glad we did it, because we heard that the following year they were
Oh
overpopulated.
yeah. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, even when we went back the following year, so skiing that year was tremendous. I got over 1,000,000 vertical feet on the mountain.
Our kids learned to
Our
ski,
our kids are
cross country,
not just, yeah, not just proficient, but fairly expert skiers at this point. It was really, really cool that we were able to do that, right? But we were able also to, it's like you were saying, and use national parks. We drove to Yellowstone, we did Grand Teton, we did Canyonlands, we did Arches, we did Mesa Verde, Black Canyon of the Gunnison, and Sand Dunes National Park. I mean, and they were all, again,
not to mention we saw
very special.
the entire state of Colorado go from point to point. Um,
Yeah.
I think we went to the Grand did we
Went to
say
Grand
Grand?
we went to the Grand Canyon,
Yeah.
we went to Sedona as well, that's right.
Yeah,
And, well, we went to not a lot of people know this, but Colorado does have vineyards, and so,
we did.
we went both to Palisades and to, Paonia, which are 2 beautiful places in the Western Slope that if you hadn't have an opportunity to visit, it's great. There's a Michelin star rated restaurant in Palisade,
Yeah.
which is a, Main and Main, that's it, 2-street
Yeah.
town. Uh
And if you're wondering, the school never had a case of COVID until the last week of the school year.
Yeah.
When they had finally decided to lift the mask restriction, and they ended up having to put it back on because it was their first case of COVID, which is crazy. Crazy, absolutely just nuts. But yeah, so a lot of people don't know that we've been back
Yeah.
for quite some time.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, we obviously having a home there made it easy, and makes it easy to kinda go back and forth, but, we did come back, and, the kids, obviously went back to school here, have been for some time, and, obviously have incredibly fond memories of their time in Colorado, and of their friends there.
Absolutely. So that's, in case anybody's wondering, we have been back for quite some time. We get this all the time. And I want to thank Danny for having that illumination to head over there and kind of steering our family in that direction. I must not have been easy to deal with that year, because I contested and I fought until I just, you know, I left it in God's hands, and it ended up being a wonderful, wonderful year. But I also want to thank him for coming back, because If it was up to him, I think he would have
Uh,
stayed.
I didn't wanna come back. It was very
But we have family here, and, everybody would ask me, "Are you guys going back?" A lot of people that went there for the first time during COVID ended up staying.
yeah.
Um, but, Miami Cubans,
Well,
it was
it's just a different look. So some of our friends that, went over there came from California, and obviously California went through some really difficult times with COVID and, shutdowns and restrictions, were extended beyond, any reasonable period of time, I think. And, thankfully our state was open and, it was, obviously everybody kind of adjusted and adapted and went back to normalcy. And, like you said, obviously our families here we have deep roots in this community. Our families and my parents live 7 doors down from us. Christy's parents live, half a mile away from us. So does her grandfather. And, we're blessed that, she still has her grandfather and her grandmother still, very much active and alive. And, it's a blessing to be able to share, our kids with their great grandparents, right? I think that's a blessing. So, obviously that's what provoked the return to Miami. And
my grandfather apparently, my grandfather and my parents were having dinner one night when we were getting ready, packing up the place to come home, and they said, "They've had such an incredible year, and they live such an amazing life over there. Maybe we should tell him to stay." And my grandfather said, "Absolutely not. I'm going to be selfish. I'm not going to be around much longer. They need to come home and be with us." Because that was the hardest part with all the fun that we were having there. It was really hard to be away from family. I mean, we had our immediate family, my parents, your parents, the kids' aunts and uncles, our siblings, our nephews and nieces all came. But my grandfather was the one that I went a whole year without seeing just because, he's elderly and he's the one that was most at risk. So there you have it. That's the reason why we came back, and I'm so grateful that he allowed that to happen. And we are once again so grateful for all the friends and family that we have, or family, if fans were family, that are in Colorado, because we love going back to visit y'all, and we miss you guys, and we miss those good old days and when it was just us on the mountain with nobody else. And if you ask our kids, if you ever run into our kids will tell you, "We have no idea what you're talking about because that was such an awesome year." Layers, perfect. So that's our COVID story. We'd love to hear yours if you ever want to send them in and talk about it. Until next week. Next week, we're going to be talking to my dear friend Monica Gonzalez Gronfle. She's a Miami gal who ended up marrying her high school sweetheart and moved to Guayaquil, Ecuador. And so she's going to be telling us what life was like when she's got all 3 kids over there, but what life was like when she got pregnant with her 3rd child, and he had a little medical issue and ended up having to come over to the United States to be treated, all the while her other 2 were living in Guayaquil. So I will let her share her own story next Monday. Until then, keep your coffee strong, your sanity intact, and hold your kids a little tighter. Bye, guys.